So the LA Clippers have just defeated the Dallas Mavericks in the Game 7 of the first round. And they came back when they were down 2-0 to Dallas, and they came down when they were down 2-3 against Dallas. And that means officially the Clippers will be facing the number 1 seed Utah Jazz in the second round of the playoffs. I think this is a series that will be pretty close. Whoever you predict to win could very well be the winner. But in today's video, I'll be discussing and predicting who I think will win the series. The way it's going to work is I'm going to give some reasons to why the Jazz could win this series and some reasons to why the Clippers could win the series. Then at the end of the video, I'm going to come to a conclusion on who I actually think will win the series and in how much games. Before we get into the video, I ask you to drop a like on this video as it does help my channel grow. Subscribe to my channel if you want weekly NBA content and touch my goal of 1,500 subscribers, and comment on this video, start a conversation with me as I actually do respond to all of my comments, and play that intro. The first reason the Utah Jazz can win this series versus the Clippers is simply the fact that Utah is a top 5 defense in the league this season. And most of that credit should go to Rudy Gobert, who is probably going to win the Defensive Player of the Year award. And in this series, Gobert is definitely going to be very crucial for the Jazz, since he'll be forcing players like Kawhi and Paul George to take more jump shots, or he'll just force them to miss more shots than they usually do in the paint. The Clippers don't really have any great big men that will give Gobert problems, but outside of Gobert, the Jazz also have a bunch of great defenders, as they have Mike Conley, who's a pretty smart and solid defender, and he's pretty good at guarding the ball. They also have Donovan Mitchell, who's a solid defender. Royce O'Neal's their second best defender in my opinion, and he's pretty good on the perimeter. Derek Favors is a really good backup center on the defensive side of the floor, and Utah in general is just a great team on defense, and a lot of the credit has to go to Quinn Snyder, who makes very good defensive schemes. They also have Rudy Gobert, as I said, who's the most impactful defender in the association. The Clippers were top 5 offense during the regular season, so if you want to beat them, you're going to need to be able to get a few stops on them. I think Utah is definitely capable of doing that, and if they could do it at a great level, it definitely could help you win. The only thing I would fear a little bit is the fact that although Utah's an overall good defensive team, I don't think they have any defenders who are capable of slowing down Kawhi Leonard or Paul George in the slightest, because it would probably put Royce O'Neal on Kawhi, and he's a really good defender, don't get me wrong. I don't think he has the length and the strength to actually slow down Kawhi. And even if they put him on Kawhi, Paul George is going to be defended by a guy like Joe Ingles or Bogdan Bogdanovic, and those guys are solid defenders, but they're definitely not going to lock up Paul George. If Paul George is going to play bad, it's going to be because of himself, but in the first round of the playoffs he was playing pretty good, so I don't think he's going to choke this year. The Jazz might run good defensive play, like defensive schemes and stuff like that, but one-on-one, I don't think they can lock up Kawhi or Paul George or even hope to slow them down. I think something the Jazz should do is maybe let Paul George and Kawhi get theirs, but lock up all the other role players, because in the first round, one of the reasons the Mavericks lost to the Clippers was the fact that Kawhi and Paul George were going off, and the role players were helping out as well. But nonetheless, if Utah wants to win this series, they're going to have to play some good defense, and I definitely think they're capable of that. The first reason the Clippers could win the series is the fact that although Utah is a good defensive team and a better defensive team than the Clippers are still a pretty good one, don't get it twisted, as obviously they have 2 of the best perimeter defenders of the last 10 years in Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. I think at least one of those guys need to be matched up against Donovan Mitchell, and I think they can give him some troubles. I think the Clippers are more likely to put Paul George on Donovan Mitchell, and I honestly think he could do a really good job. I still expect Mitchell to have a good series simply because he's such a great talent, but Paul George definitely could play some good defense on him. They also have solid defenders like Marcus Morris who could switch on to him. Patrick Beverley should play more in this series, since Donovan Mitchell's not a big guard who just bullies people like Luka. He's definitely going to attack players like Nicholas Batum and Ivica Zubac, but he's not going to like body people, if you know what I mean. But regardless, the Clippers are a really good defensive team, and they're especially good at communicating. In the series versus the Jazz, that's going to be very important, since the Jazz are one of the best teams in the league when it comes to moving the ball. The ball rarely sticks in one person's hand, and that makes their offense really hard to defend. The only time it sticks in someone's hand is when they're doing a pick and roll, but often off the pick and roll, it turns into a bunch of ball movement. So the Jazz are just a very hard team to defend, and if the Clippers want to beat them, they're going to have to communicate well and just defend them at a good level. And I honestly think that the Clippers are very much capable of doing just that. The second reason I think the Utah Jazz can win the series is the fact that, as I said, Utah is a phenomenal offensive team. They were top 5 in offense this season, and their offense is one that I think could work in the postseason, because they're not a team like the Portland Trail Blazers where their like game style revolves around one-on-one play. They don't say, yo, Donovan Mitchell, get me a bucket all the time. They don't say, oh, Mike Conley, go get me a bucket all the time. They rely on ball movement a lot, and that's something that's very hard to guard no matter who you are. The Jazz also have a bunch of elite shot creators, as they have Donovan Mitchell, who played phenomenal this season, and I think he's really underrated, and he played pretty good in the first round versus the Memphis Grizzlies, so I don't think he'll be hindered by his ankle. And I do think the Clippers will be putting some good defenders on him, but I don't think he'll get clamped up in this series. But unlike Luka, Mitchell actually has some consistent help, as he has Mike Conley, who was really good this season and was an all-star. He was Jordan Clarkson, who was the 6th man of the year. He has Bogdan Bogdanovic, who's a guy who could score 16 to 18 points consistently. He has Joe Ingles, who was top 3 in voting for the 6th man of the year candidacy. And he has Royce O'Neal, who's a pretty good 3-point shooter. And Rudy Gobert is one of the best rim finishers and lob targets in the whole NBA. So the Clippers won't be able to just easily double team Mitchell, because he's a pretty good passer and he will find open teammates. The Clippers will really struggle to defend this Utah Jazz offense. And if the Jazz want to beat the Clippers, I think their offense is going to have to be pretty solid, and they're going to have to knock down their open shots. I think there's a realistic chance that they do just that. The second reason I believe the LA Clippers could win the series is the fact that in the series, the Clippers have an elite offense as well. And on top of that, they have even more star power. As during the regular season, the Clippers were a top 5 offense, and they were first in the league in 3-point percentage. And I actually think they were one of the best teams in NBA history when it came to 3-point percentage. So you definitely can't leave most of their players open. And the Clippers also have a superstar in Kawhi Leonard, who's a top 5 player in the NBA right now, and he's just unstoppable. And as I said, I don't really think anyone on Utah can lock him down, so he's definitely going to produce at his usual rate. They also have Paul George, who played very well in the first round matchup versus the Dallas Mavericks, so I have no reason to think he's going to choke and underperform in this series, and I think he'll be very important for the Clippers. Then outside of those 2 stars, the Clippers have a bunch of shooters, as they have Marcus Morris, who came up big in Game 7, hitting 7 threes. They also have Terrence Mann, who stepped up in that Game 7, and I think he'll get more minutes in this series after playing so well. They also have Nicholas Batum, who's a solid shooter and is just a very smart player. He makes smart cuts and makes his open shots. Reggie Jackson was huge for them in the whole series versus the Mavs, and he took Patrick Beverley's minutes. I actually think he should keep getting Patrick Beverley's minutes because he's shooting the ball so well. And although Utah is a good defensive team, the Clippers are a very good offensive team, so you can't just ignore that. The Clippers can actually run a very good small ball lineup that has just like bare 3-point shooters. They can run a lineup of Reggie Jackson, who's a great shooter, Kawhi obviously, Paul George, Marcus Morris, and Nicholas Batum at the 5 spot. And in that series versus the Dallas Mavericks, that small ball lineup actually worked pretty good. And that kind of lineup can be very crucial versus the Jazz, since Rudy Gobert likes to lurk in the paint, but if they have 5 players on the court who could shoot and handle the ball, that forces Rudy to be out of the paint, and it could really open up the driving lanes for Kawhi and Paul George. And although Rudy is an improved player at guarding the perimeter, he's not as bad as he was before. He still can get cooked by guys like Kawhi and Paul George, so that's definitely an advantage for the Clippers. But if the Clippers want to beat the number 1 seed, they're gonna need to be able to hit their wide open shots and just produce on offense. The third reason I believe the Utah Jazz can win the series is the fact that in the series, the Jazz will have the coaching advantage. Since although Tyronn Lue is definitely a better coach than he was with the Cavs, I think it's pretty obvious that Quinn Snyder is the clear better coach in this series, because in the first round versus the Clippers, the Mavericks obviously gave the Clippers a lot of trouble, and the Clippers literally have the 2 best perimeter defenders in the league, along with a bunch of solid ones, and they couldn't stop Luka from averaging over 30 points in the series, as well as having 2 40-point games. Just shows me that Tyronn Lue is not that great at making defensive scheme, and there was many moments where the Clippers just couldn't score, and it shows me that Tyronn Lue isn't running great offensive schemes. He's obviously not a bad coach, since the Clippers were the 4th seed in the Western Conference, but Quinn Snyder is significantly better. And in my opinion, he should be second in the race for the coach of the year behind only Tom Thibodeau. And in the series like this, where it's very close and having a coaching advantage can make or break whether or not you win the series. And I think it's pretty clear that Quinn Snyder is better, as I said, because Snyder is not afraid to completely sit players out. Also, Snyder's fantastic at running offensive plays as running defensive plays. So if you take in that the Jazz have a way better coach, I definitely think it will improve their chances of winning the series. The third reason the LA Clippers could win the series is the fact that in the series, I expect there to be some close games that go down to the wire. And in these situations, it usually comes down to star players and things like that. And I think at the end of the games, I would give the slight edge to the LA Clippers. The main reason is because they have Kawhi Leonard, who's one of the more clutch players in the whole NBA. Don't get me wrong, Donovan Mitchell is a clutch player, and he could very well win some games for the Jazz and lead them to close wins. I don't think anyone would argue when I say that Kawhi Leonard is a better closer than Donovan Mitchell. I think that's the slight advantage that they need, and that will help them win the close games at the end of the games. Because I trust Kawhi Leonard more than I trust Donovan Mitchell. No disrespect to Utah, but they don't have many guys who can hit big shots. Those guys can hit big shots, but it's freaking Kawhi Leonard. He hit one of the biggest shots in NBA history. I just trust him more, and I trust him especially down the stretch of the whole fourth quarter. And I think if there's a close game, I would more likely to bet on the Clippers to win it. And if they could steal a game or two just because the game's close and Kawhi goes off in the fourth quarter, I could obviously help their chances of winning the series. But to conclude the video, if I had to give my prediction on who I think will win the series, I honestly believe the Utah Jazz will pull off the semi-upset. Because although they're the higher seed, there are many people that are predicting the Clippers to win the series. But I actually think the Utah Jazz will win, and I think they will come out of the series with a close 7-game series. The reason I have the Jazz winning because I believe their offense is a little bit better than the Clippers, and their defense is better. And I also feel like Utah's not a team built just for the regular season, and I honestly think that they will pull it off and actually win this. And if you've been watching some of my older videos, you would know I don't like the Clippers, but I swear this is an unbiased take. I just honestly think Utah has the better roster. They also have really good depth, and I think Donovan Mitchell can really pull this off. And in this series, I'm definitely going to be a Utah Jazz fan. But don't get me wrong, anyone can win this series. And if you choose the Clippers to win, I don't think you're crazy or anything like that. I just think Utah will narrowly win the series. Anyways, guys, that's it for the video. Let me know who you think is going to win the series. Drop a like on this video to help my channel grow. Subscribe to my channel if you want weekly NBA content and touch my goal of 1,000 subscribers. Comment on this video, start a conversation with me, as I actually do respond to all of my comments. And I'm out.